Top 10 Favourite Doctor Who Eras. Hello and welcome to this week's video. Now I did a top 14 Doctors videos once, but even that was like 4 years ago, and I don't entirely agree with it anymore as either. And I don't think I've ever done a kind of a eras, because era is not necessarily the same as Doctor. Obviously the Doctor's an important part of it, but it's not just about the lead. So I thought I'd do a top 10 favourite Doctor Who eras vid. Number 10, the Peter Capaldi era. Now this might come as a bit of a surprise to find this here, as I have been highly vocal critic of this era. And in many ways, I still am. I mean, I generally liked Series 10 at the time. I was really not impressed by Series 8 and 9. Honestly, it took me till about Series 10 to even really start to warm to Capaldi. Now, over the course of the last 4 years, I have warmed to his Doctor a lot more, even in his earlier seasons. And I do kind of like him now. And I do kind of think that he was let down a lot by the writing. I have been re-watching some of his era in the last year or so and re-evaluating it to a certain degree. Series 8, I still pretty much think exactly the same that I did when I did the review 4 or 5 years ago. I really like Deep Breath, I really like Mummy, I really like Flatline. The rest of it is not good. I mean, to be fair, I found Into the Dalek and The Caretaker and Robot of Sherwood slightly more watchable on a review, but they're still not exactly very good. And I still think Listen starts off really well and then just crumbles away to nothing. Series 9 I have warmed to a little bit more. I still think that the opening two-parter is one of the worst things I have ever seen. Even watching it again with the best will in the world and, wanting to kind of like it, I could not make it more than a few minutes into part 2. Oh god, it's bad. But I do like the Under the Lake two-parter. I still really like Face the Raven. I've warmed to the initial Maisie Williams two-parter. It's not great, but I don't mind it. I can watch it, so And just this last couple of weeks, I've actually watched properly, really, for the first time, the Zygon two-parter and Sleep No More. Now, I still stand by most of the criticisms of the Zygon two-parter, in that it really is a clumsy, ham-fisted and subtle as a brick metaphor for immigration. And the Zygons are completely the wrong race to do that with. One of the scariest one-off monsters in classic Who, and now they're all just mostly just really nice people. I mean, I still think that's just unbelievably neutering and lame, but I watched it. I mean, it was fun in a dumb kind of a way. And Sleep No More, I surprised myself by enjoying quite a lot. Again, I still think the concept behind the monsters is really dumb, even though I liked the idea of the Morpheus machine itself. But really, Sleep Dust? I mean, honestly, I would have preferred something, like, I don't know, the Morpheus machine was removing our ability to dream and have nightmares, and thus those nightmares are coming out into the real world. I mean, yes, it's not very scientific, but then neither is Sleep Dust. I mean, what? But I enjoyed the episode for the most part, and I liked the ending too. So I have been warming to this era a bit more. It's still never going to be one of my absolute favourites, but yeah, I can see good things in it. 9. The Peter Davison era. Now this is an era of the show that I have a lot of fondness for, and I like the Fifth Doctor. It's just an era I can never quite wholeheartedly, get into. There's some really good stories. I mean, I really like Black Orchid and Earthshock and the Black Guardian trilogy and the Five Doctors and Awakening and Androzani. But there's also a lot of kind of fairly bland ones that don't really do anything for me. And the Fifth Doctor himself is not one of my favourites. Perhaps the weakest thing about the era to me is the companions. There's just none of the companions I can really get behind. Certainly in season 19, they're very kind of weak, and the weak link in a way. But even when that kind of gets better later on, none of the companions are really among my favourites. So there's a vaguely antiseptic quality to the Davison era that means that I really like it, and as part of Classic Who, I have my Classic Who fan affection for it. But again, I can't really put it any higher. 8. The Hartnell Era. Now, some of you may be surprised to see this being so low, since a few years ago I was absolutely raving and in love with it. The Hartnell Era is it's a really odd one for me, because it's one of the only Classic Who eras that I really kind of tend to go up and down with. When I started as a Doctor Who fan in the late 80s, it was not an era I was very fond of. I mean, there wasn't a lot of it to see, and what there was, the picture and sound quality wasn't always very good, and it's very slow and creaky, even in comparison to 80s Doctor Who or 70s or even Trouton Era Doctor Who. Now, as we got into the 2000s and more, I kind of saw more of it, and the DVDs came out with better picture quality and sound and all of that, and I started kind of watching them in order. I started to appreciate the era a lot more and even fall in love with it to a degree. And that was the case about 5 or 6 years ago, as you can tell from the reviews. Unfortunately, the last couple of years, it's been time to watch it again and go back and watch them again, and I've found myself struggling with it again because of the slow pace and the slightly rough nature of the productions, etc., etc. I've just found myself struggling with it again, which is really disappointing, because I was really looking forward to seeing it again. So yeah, it's an odd one. I mean, I love the First Doctor, and I love most of his companions, especially Ian and Barbara and Vicky. I mean, who knows? I hate kind of ranking it this low, but at the moment, it's one I'm struggling with and one I'm not really reaching for like I am most of the others. So I can't really justify putting it any higher. I mean, who knows? If I do something like this again in another 4 years, it may well have flipped back again. That's just the way this era seems to work with me. 7. The Colin Baker Era. Now, the Colin Baker Era is another really odd one because it's so short. I mean, it's really just 2 seasons for the most part. And it's very schizophrenic within those 2 seasons, because I absolutely adore season 22, and I love Colin's Doctor in season 22, and yet then you flip and you get to season 23 and the trial season, and I'm not so keen on either. Terror of the Vervoids works pretty well as a standalone story. I really enjoyed that on the special edition Blu-ray, delinking it from Trial, but Trial as a whole, is probably my least favourite classic season. So I like the era, but I can't put it any higher because, like I said, there's only 2 seasons, and while I really love the other one, I really don't like that one. So it's a bit of an odd one. They're all odd, aren't they, really? 6. The Hinchcliffe Era. Yes, I'm going to be difficult and split up the Tom Baker era, and I think rightly. I mean, it is very different. You could argue that the Tom Baker era is 3 different shows in a way: the Hinchcliffe era, the Williams era, and the beginning of the JNT era. Now, you're not going to find season 18 in this list, just like you're not going to find the Eccleston era, because I don't really consider one season to constitute an era, for starters, and I doubt either of them would be in anyway. But yeah, I mean, you've got 2 sets of 3 seasons under different producers that have a very different feel to them. So yeah, and this is the Hinchcliffe era's place for me. I like the Hinchcliffe era. I admit that the veneration and adulation of it does kind of set my teeth on edge sometimes, because it's not my favourite era. It's not even among my top 5 favourite eras. I love season 14. I think season 14 is great and has some absolute crackers in there, especially from Assassin through Talons. Brilliant, brilliant stories. I quite like Mask, which apparently a lot of people don't, judging from the response to my review of that last year. I'm doing a nice review of it, and everyone's going, I think it's crap. On the flip side, I don't rate season 12 at all. And I know that's not a very popular opinion, but it just comes across as kind of another Pertwee season to me. Not even a very good Pertwee season. And it just has this kind of bland feel to it. Even season 8, it's my least favourite Tom season, honestly. Even season 18 has State of Decay in, which I absolutely love and adore. Season 12, all of it just kind of And season 13, I'm kind of 50-50 on. I like some of it. I really don't like some of it as well. So it's a solid era. I'm not bashing it, but it's not one of my absolute favourites. 5. The Matt Smith era. Ooh my, a New Who era coming this high up. Now, you knew it was going to be this one. If anyone was going to get this high in my list, you knew it was going to be this one. And I have to admit, the longer... I mean, it's interesting as, you know, these things start to recede into the past and just become some other era that you can mix and match and cherry pick and enjoy and whatever. Just like us, like Classic Who, they're no longer current. Some eras, let me put it this way, you're not going to find the Tennant era in this list. I'm sorry, I didn't much like it at the time, and I don't think it's aged very well either. Whereas the Smith era, I mostly liked at the time, went off it toward the end, but as the years are going past and I'm reaching for it, I find myself reaching for a Smith story on a surprisingly regular basis, and not just from Series 5. And I love Series 5, it's definitely the best of the era. Series 6, think about Series 6's. I actually really liked Series 6 on broadcast back in 2011. And then sometime in the 5 years between that and me reviewing it in 2016, I went off it big time. I don't know why. Maybe it was too much reviewing, or maybe it was just that I went off New Who big time across Series 7, 8 and 9. But yeah, I was not very kind to it in that review. But I did say a couple of years back when I did the 5th Doctor versus 11th Doctor era grudge match that I kind of flipped back again. I kind of like Series 6 a lot now. It's still not as good as 5, but I like it for the most part, even if there are problems with it. Let's Kill Hitler. Series 7 is my least favourite of the era and still is. But I have warmed to some of it. As with Series 6, there were a couple of episodes that I liked the first time and then really went off later on, like Asylum of the Daleks and Angels Take Manhattan. And I agree with my criticisms, because I do agree with the logic problems in those episodes. And yeah, I still kind of enjoy watching them anyway, partly because I like the regulars so much. I think that's why this era really is at this point in my list, even if I still can see some of the problems with it. And I really like the 11th Doctor, and I really like Amy, and I really like Rory. They're by far my favourite TARDIS team of the entire new series, by a long, long way. Clara, I'm not a big fan of, but she's only in like the last half of season 7, so it's like, eh. And I've even warmed to some of that lately. I actually watched The Snowmen a few weeks back, and I actually kind of enjoyed it. That's what I've been kind of... I found myself trying that one again, because I feel like I should like it, because I like the 11th Doctor, I enjoy the Paternoster gang, I like Richard E. Grant, I like the Victoriana and snowy atmosphere. And I actually enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed it the other week. I actually really enjoyed it. There's still a couple of... The ending is still crap. And there are a couple of moments where, they've got the Doctor acting like a tit for no reason, which is really... But for the most part, I enjoyed it. And I've even warmed to some stuff like Bells of St. John and Rings of Ackerton. And I've always liked the Crimson Horror. That was my favourite of the season, even back then, and I still do. So yeah, I really like the Matt Smith era. I have to be honest. It's the one New Who era that I would take with me to a desert island. Really, I actually struggled whether to put this fifth or fourth, or even to have a tie. In the end, I couldn't quite justify it, but I still really like it. 4. The Pertwee Era. The Pertwee Era is, of course, pretty classic stuff. I mean, the Third Doctor is one of the most iconic Doctors, and still is, and always will be, and quite rightly. Jon Pertwee is a fantastic Doctor. And I love the Brigadier, Nicholas Courtney. I don't think Doctor Who's ever really been the same since we lost him in 2011, to be honest with you. There are some issues with the Pertwee era. I'm not a big fan of Season 9, to put it mildly. I love Day of the Daleks, but the rest of the season kind of veers from dull to dull and really dumb. I have warmed more to Season 8 recently. That was a season I was always kind of middling on, and I've kind of warmed more to that recently. I've always really liked Season 10. That's a really good anniversary season. And a Season 7, of course, is just absolutely unimpeachable. And there are some fantastic stories throughout the era. Like I said, including Day of the Daleks and Time Warrior from outside of those seasons I've mentioned. I've been reaching for Pertwee a few times this year, I must admit. I've watched Spearhead, I've watched Terror, I've watched Mind of Evil. I watched Terror on not Mind of Evil. I've watched Terror. I actually watched that on the Season 8 Blu-ray. I'm not gonna tell you what I thought of the Blu-ray. I'm gonna hold that off for an end of year review at the end of the year, because, well, I have to have something to talk about. It's not exactly been a very exciting year otherwise. What else have I watched? Oh, an Invasion of the Dinosaurs. Yeah, I'm really enjoying the Pertwee era at the moment. I'm looking forward to watching the rest of Season 8 on Blu-ray, and hoping we'll get something else on Blu-ray as well. I really like the Pertwee era. It was a tough call, honestly, between this and the Smith era, because I really liked both of them. In the end, I had to go for the classic one. 3. The Trouton Era. Now, I did a whole video on why I love the Trouton Era just a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much. But yeah, I love the Second Doctor. I've always loved the Second Doctor. I love Jamie. I love Zoe. I love the atmosphere of the era. And as I said in that video, this is one that the Lost Story finds and the animations have filled in the gaps and made me appreciate it even more. Because, I mean, when I started, there wasn't that much to watch from the era, and now there's a lot more. And I will say this as well. I'm not gonna review it again. I'm just gonna say, because I'll do so at the end of the year, I broke my resolve, and I actually bought the special edition Blu-ray of Power of the Daleks. That's all I'm gonna say. 2. The McCoy Era. Now, I know that's not going to be a popular opinion with some, but I love the McCoy Era, and it's my era. I mean, maybe it's as simple as that. Honestly, I sometimes think that a lot of the veneration of the Hinchcliffe era is just from the fact that these people were the right age and grew up with it. That's my personal opinion. And the McCoy era is that for me. McCoy era is almost like, in a way, it's almost like a reverse of the Smith era, in that the Smith era kind of goes a little bit downhill as it goes on, whereas the McCoy era kind of starts off weak, then gets then gets a lot better, and then ends on an absolute high with season 26. I love Sylvester's Doctor. I love Ace. And yeah, I mean, even though there's only 12 stories, some of those stories are just some of my absolute favourites, like Remembrance and Greatest Show and Fenric and Ghostlight and Survival. I love the magical atmosphere of it. Honestly, in some ways, I think the Smith era is like a... People go on about the Davies era following on from the McCoy era just because Survival's got a council estate in it. I've never seen that, honestly. To me, the Smith era almost feels like a natural continuation of the McCoy era because of the more kind of fantasy element of it. That's just my opinion, anyway. But yeah, I love the McCoy era, and I always will. The season 24 box set is actually out in a few days here in Australia, and I'm looking forward to getting that. 1. I think you probably know what I'm going to say by now, especially if you're a regular viewer of this channel. My favourite era of Doctor Who is the Williams era. Seasons 15 to 17. I'm sorry, but to me, this is my favourite era of Doctor Who. I agree that season 15 is probably the weakest. It's not as good as the other two, but it's still pretty good. I mean, Horror of Fang Rock is one of the best stories ever. The Sunmakers isn't far behind. Another absolutely wonderful story. Images of Fendel. And we get K9 introduced in season 15, which is... I love K9. I adore K9. And season 16 and 17 are just two of my absolute favourites. I adore Tom and Lala. I love the first Romana too. Mary's wonderful too. And honestly, recently I've always kind of thought season 17 was my favourite, but recently I've kind of moved over to season 16 slightly. I think the only thing with season 16 was I could never quite warm to the pirate planet, and that's actually changed in the last year or so, because I actually watched that, I don't know, 18 months or so again, and I actually liked that more than I've ever liked it before. So that it's pretty much a perfect season to me. I don't get, why people don't like Power or Power of Kroll or Armageddon Factor. I really like both of those, and I just love the whole atmosphere of it. And of course I adore season 17. I love Tom and Lala. I love the wackiness of it. City of Death, Shardar, Naimon. I'm sorry, I know, another unpopular opinion. I'd rather watch Destiny than Genesis. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, as Tennant would say. But yeah, the Williams era is my favourite era of Doctor Who. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.